Configure Role-Based Access Control. Learn how to use Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, to ensure resources are protected, but users can still access the resources they need. Note: this content was partially created with the help of AI. An author reviewed and revised the content as needed. Read more. Learning objectives. In this module, you learn how to identify features and use cases for role-based access control. List and create role definitions. Create role assignments. Identify differences between Azure RBAC and Microsoft Entra roles. Manage access to subscriptions with RBAC. Review built-in Azure RBAC roles. Prerequisites. Introduction. Completed 100 XP. 1 minute. Azure administrators need to secure access to their Azure resources like virtual machines, VMs, websites, networks, and storage. Administrators need mechanisms to help them manage who can access their resources, and what actions are allowed. Organizations that do business in the cloud recognize that securing their resources is a critical function of their infrastructure. In this module, your business is investigating how to ensure their corporate data and assets are protected. They want secure protection that enables them to control access to their data and resources by specifying roles and access privileges for employees and business partners. You're responsible for researching how to use role-based access control, RBAC, to accomplish these tasks. You need to ensure the company assets are protected, and also support user access to the resources. The goal of this module is to understand the features and use cases for Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. You learn how to create role definitions and role assignments, and find and use built-in Azure RBAC roles. Additionally, you explore how to use RBAC to manage access to subscriptions. You also review the differences between Azure RBAC and Entra ID roles. Learning objectives. In this module, you learn how to understand the concepts and principles of Azure RBAC, create role definitions and role assignments, identify differences between Azure RBAC and Microsoft Entra roles. Use RBAC to manage access to resources. Review and select the best built-in Azure role for a scenario. Prerequisites. Familiarity with Azure. Having a general understanding of Azure services, concepts, and terminology that helps you grasp RBAC more effectively. Identity concepts. A basic understanding of Microsoft Entra ID, which is Microsoft's cloud-based identity and access management service, is essential. Knowledge of concepts like users, groups, roles, and permissions are helpful. Azure Resource Management. Understanding how resources are organized, deployed, and managed provides context for RBAC implementation. Access control models. Knowledge of access control models, such as discretionary access control, DAC, and mandatory access control, MAC. This knowledge helps you understand the principles behind RBAC and its advantages over traditional access control mechanisms. Next unit. Implement role-based access control. Implement role-based access control. Completed 100 XP. 3 minutes. Secure access management for cloud resources is critical for businesses that operate in the cloud. Role-based access control, RBAC, is a mechanism that can help you manage who can access your Azure resources. RBAC lets you determine what operations specific users can do on specific resources, and control what areas of a resource each user can access. Azure RBAC is an authorization system built on Azure Resource Manager. Azure RBAC provides fine-grained access management of resources in Azure. Things to know about Azure RBAC. Here are some things you can do with Azure RBAC. Allow an application to access all resources in a resource group. Allow one user to manage VMs in a subscription, and allow another user to manage virtual networks. Allow a database administrator, DBA, group to manage SQL databases in a subscription. Allow a user to manage all resources in a resource group, such as VMs, websites, and subnets. Azure RBAC concepts. The following table describes the core concepts of Azure RBAC. Expand table. Concept description. Example: security principle, an object that represents something that requests access to resources. User, group, service principle, managed identity. Role definition, a set of permissions that lists the allowed operations. Azure RBAC comes with built-in role definitions, but you can also create your own custom role definitions. Some built-in role definitions: reader, contributor, owner, User Access Administrator scope the boundary for the requested level of access, or how much access is granted. Management Group, Subscription, Resource Group, Resource Assignment. An assignment attaches a role definition to a security principle at a particular scope. Users can grant the access described in a role definition by creating, attaching, an assignment for the role. Assign the User Access Administrator role to an admin group scope to a management group. Assign the contributor role to a user scope to a subscription. Things to consider when using Azure RBAC. As you think about how you can implement roles and scope assignments within your organization, consider these points. Consider your requesters. Plan your strategy to accommodate for all types of access to your resources. Security principles are created for anything that requests access to your resources. Determine who are the requesters in your organization. Requesters can be internal or external users, groups of users, applications and services, resources, and so on. Consider your roles. Examine the types of job responsibilities and work scenarios in your organization. Roles are commonly built around the requirements to fulfill job tasks or complete work goals. Certain users like administrators, corporate controllers, and engineers can require a level of access beyond what most users need. Some roles can be defined to provide the same access for all members of a team or department for specific resources or applications. Consider scope of permissions. Think about how you can ensure security by controlling the scope of permissions for role assignments. Outline the types of permissions and levels of scope that you need to support. You can apply different scope levels for a single role to support requesters in different scenarios. Consider built-in or custom definitions. Review the built-in role definitions in Azure RBAC. Built-in roles can be used as is, or adjusted to meet the specific requirements for your organization. You can also create custom role definitions from scratch. Next unit, create a role definition. Continue. Having an issue? Create a role definition. Completed 100 XP. 4 minutes. A role definition consists of sets of permissions that are defined in a JSON file. Each permission set has a name, such as actions or not actions that describe the permissions. Some examples of permission sets include: actions permissions identify what actions are allowed. Not actions permissions specify what actions aren't allowed. Data actions permissions indicate how data can be changed or used. Assignable scopes permissions list the scopes where a role definition can be assigned. The following diagram shows details for the contributor role in Azure RBAC. The actions permissions show the contributor role has all action privileges. The asterisk wildcard means all. The not actions permissions narrow the privileges provided by the action set, and deny 3 actions. Authorization / delete, not authorized to delete or remove for all. Authorization / write, not authorized to write or change for all. Authorization / elevate access / action, not authorized to increase the level or scope of access privileges. The contributor role also has 2 permissions to specify how data can be affected. Not data actions, no specific actions are listed. Therefore, all actions can affect the data. Assignable scopes / the role can be assigned for all scopes that affect data. Things to know about role definitions. Review the following characteristics of role definitions. Azure RBAC provides built-in roles and permission sets. You can also create custom roles and permissions. The owner built-in role has the highest level of access privilege in Azure. The system subtracts not actions permissions from actions permissions to determine the effective permissions for a role. The assignable scopes permissions for a role can be management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, or resources. Role permissions. Use the actions and not actions permissions together to grant and deny the exact privileges for each role. The actions permissions can provide the breadth of access and the not actions permissions can narrow the access. The following table shows how the actions or not actions permissions are used in the definitions for 3 built-in roles: owner, contributor, and reader. The permissions are narrowed from the owner role to the contributor and reader roles to limit access. Expand table. Role name description actions permissions not actions permissions owner allow all actions NA contributor allow all actions, except write or delete role assignment. Microsoft.authorization//delete. Microsoft.authorization//write. Microsoft.authorization/elevate access/action reader allow all read actions /read NA. Role scopes. After you define the role permissions, you use the assignable scopes permissions to specify how the role can be assigned. Let's look at a few examples. Scope a role is available for assignment in 2 subscriptions. /subscription/C276FC76 /subscription/E91D47C476F34271A79621B4X3624. Scope a role is available for assignment only in the network resource group. /subscription/C276FC769CD444C999A74FD715464336E/resource group/network. Scope a role is available for assignment for all requesters. Things to consider when creating roles. Consider the following points about creating role definitions in Azure RBAC. Consider using built-in roles. Review the list of built-in role definitions in Azure RBAC. There are over 100 predefined role definitions to choose from, such as owner, backup operator, website contributor, and SQL security manager. Built-in roles are defined for several categories of services, tasks, and users, including general, networking, storage, databases, and more. Consider creating custom definitions. Define your own custom roles to meet specific business scenarios for your organization. You can modify the permissions for a built-in role to meet the specific requirements for your organization. You can also create custom role definitions from scratch. Consider limiting access scope. Assign your roles with the minimum level of scope required to perform the job duties. Some users, like administrators, require full access to corporate resources to maintain the infrastructure. Other users in the organization can require write access to personal or team resource, and read-only access to shared company resources. Consider controlling changes to data. Identify data or resources that should only be modified in specific scenarios and apply tight access control. Limit users to the least amount of access they need to get their work done. A well-planned access management strategy helps to maintain your infrastructure and prevent security issues. Consider applying deny assignments. Determine if you need to implement the deny assignment feature. Similar to a role assignment, a deny assignment attaches a set of deny actions to a user, group, or service principal at a particular scope for the purpose of denying access. Deny assignments block users from performing specific Azure resource actions even if a role assignment grants them access. Next, create a role assignment. Completed 100 XP. 2 minutes. A role assignment is the process of scoping a role definition to limit permissions for a requester, such as a user, group, service principal, or managed identity. Things to know about role assignments. Review the following characteristics of role assignments. The purpose of a role assignment is to control access. The scope limits which permissions defined for a role are available for the assigned requester. Access is revoked by removing a role assignment. A resource inherits role assignments from its parent resource. The effective permissions for a requester are a combination of the permissions for the requester's assigned roles, and the permissions for the roles assigned to the requested resources. Things to consider when assigning scope levels for roles. The following diagram shows an example of how scopes can be applied for a role to grant varying levels of access for different users. Think about how you can implement scopes for your roles to create meaningful assignments for your organization. This scenario has the following access management configuration. 3 security principles are supported: user, group, service principal. 6 built-in roles are implemented, and 2 custom roles are defined: reader support tickets and virtual machine operator. The built-in contributor role has 2 sets of permissions, actions and not actions. The contributor role is assigned at different scopes to the marketing group and pharma sales resource group. Users in the marketing group are granted access to create or manage any Azure resource in the pharma sales resource group. Marketing users aren't granted access to resources outside the pharma sales resource group, unless they have another role assignment that grants them access to the resource group. Next unit, compare Azure roles to Microsoft Entra roles. Continue. Having an issue? We can help. For issues related to this module, compare Azure roles to Microsoft Entra roles. Completed 100 XP. 2 minutes. 3 types of roles are available for access management in Azure. Classic Subscription Administrator roles. Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, roles. Microsoft Entra Administrator roles. To better understand how these different roles are defined and implemented in Azure, it helps to know some of the history. When Azure was initially released, access to resources was managed with just 3 administrator roles: Account Administrator, Service Administrator, and Co-Administrator. Access was controlled by assigning admin roles to subscriptions. Later, Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, for Azure resources was added. Azure RBAC is a newer authorization system that provides fine-grained access management to Azure resources. RBAC includes many built-in roles that can be assigned at different scopes. The Azure RBAC model also lets you create your own custom roles. In addition to Azure RBAC roles, Microsoft Entra ID provides built-in administrator roles to manage Microsoft Entra resources like users, groups, and domains. Expand table. Azure RBAC roles. Microsoft Entra ID admin roles. Access management manages access to Azure resources, manages access to Microsoft Entra resources. Scope assignment. Scope can be specified at multiple levels, including management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. Scope is specified at the tenant level. Role definitions. Roles can be defined via the Azure portal, the Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, Azure Resource Manager templates, and the REST API. Roles can be defined via the Azure Admin Portal, Microsoft 365 Admin Portal, and Microsoft Graph PowerShell. Next unit, apply. Apply role-based access control. Completed 100 XP. 2 minutes. Built-in role definitions in Azure RBAC are defined for several categories of services, tasks, and users. You can assign built-in roles at different scopes to support various scenarios, and build custom roles from the base definitions. Microsoft Entra ID also provides built-in roles to manage resources in Microsoft Entra ID, including users, groups, and domains. Microsoft Entra ID offers administrator roles that you can implement for your organization, such as global admin, application admin, and application developer. The following diagram illustrates how you can apply Microsoft Entra administrator roles and Azure RBAC roles in your organization. Microsoft Entra admin roles are used to manage resources in Microsoft Entra ID, such as users, groups, and domains. These roles are defined for the Microsoft Entra tenant at the root level of the configuration. Azure RBAC roles provide more granular access management for Azure resources. These roles are defined for a requester or resource and can be applied at multiple levels: the root, management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, or resources. Next unit, review fundamental Azure RBAC roles. Continue. Having an issue? We can help. For issues related to this module, explore existing questions using the hashtag Azure Training tag or ask a question on Microsoft Q&A. For issues related to certifications and exams, post on Credentials Support Forum or visit our Credentials Help. Feedback. Was this page helpful? Yes, no.